welcome or welcome back if you have been to my channel before. So today I am going to be filming my, I keep on wanting to say February wrap up, but no, my January wrap up. And I kind of would rather not be filming this today because I have a headache and I didn't do my makeup or anything, but the longer I wait to film it, the less likely it is for it to happen. So we're just gonna do it now. So in the month of January, I read 4 books successfully. I DNF'd 3 books, and it's looking like my average star rating was about 3.5 stars. So let's get right into the books that I read this month. In the last wrap-up video that I did all my DNFs first, but I want to do this one a little bit differently because one of my DNFs is a sequel to a book that I did read this month. So I'm going to do 2 of the DNFs first, and then I'll talk about the third one a little bit later on in this video. So the first book that I DNF'd this month last month was The Killing Moon by N.K. Jemisin. And this is a very soft DNF. So this is more like a I'll be back soon sort of DNF. I am not really in the mood for very high fantasy right now. This month, I decided that I was just going to mood read, and whatever moved me is what I read, and whatever didn't move me, I put down. This one, I just wasn't in the mood for. I do know, and I have heard in the past and in the present, because I actually saw a video of somebody talking about another N.K. Jemisin book earlier this week. N.K. Jemisin's writing is very unique and very different, and in this particular video, I can't think of the creator who was talking. I can't think of their channel name. If I do remember, I'll put it in the description somewhere. But they were basically talking about how a lot of people give up on N.K. Jemisin books because the writing style is so different and so unique. And that it does take a little bit more brain power in order to get through the first couple of chapters of her works because the world building is so different, the dialect is so different. So because of that, it can seem not even like a chore, but it's just a lot, and I'm just not in the mood for that right now. So I put this one down, and I'm hoping for when I am in more of a fantasy mood, I will pick this back up because I really do want to get into N.K. Jemisin because I have heard such good things about her books. So The Killing Moon, unfortunately, was a soft DNF for this month. Another book that I DNF'd is kind of like a soft DNF, but a little bit harder of a DNF than The Killing Moon, is Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. So I picked this book up after I did the Reading 100 Pages a Day 4-week challenge, and I kind of wanted this to be like somewhat of like, not even a palate cleanser, but just like a fun, quick read, because this book is very short. It is barely 300 pages long. But I just found that I think that I got about like 40 or 50 pages into it, and I just found that I wasn't really enjoying the story that much. I wasn't really looking for it to pick it up, and I kind of put it down like for any slight inconvenience. So that made me realize that it just wasn't the book for me at the time. The reason I say that this is a little bit of a harder DNF than The Killing Moon was is because this is a YA romance book, and I tend to not really like YA romance books. I understand why the characters are usually written in a certain way in YA books and why they make certain decisions and things don't always make sense. Teenagers make rash decisions. Things don't always make sense with them. But it's something that I just can't quite relate to anymore, and it's something that bothers me more than anything else. And while I'll say this book didn't really bother me that much, I just felt like it was very, I don't even know how to describe it. I just wasn't zhuzhing with it. It didn't give me the spark. It didn't give me the zhuzh that I wanted. So like I said, if it's not giving me the vibes this month, then I am DNFing it, even if it's something that I think that I might like in the future. So I did also DNF Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute. So for the other books for the month that I did finish. So should I start? I'm going to start in order of which I read them. So the first book that I successfully read this month was Zenny by Rebecca Weatherspoon, and I gave Zenny 4 stars. I read this again during my Reading 100 Pages a Day for a Week challenge, and in that video I did say that I was thinking about upgrading this to a 5-star, but I ultimately decided that the 4-star was the most fitting star rating. So I really, really thoroughly enjoyed this book. I really liked Zenny as a character. I really liked a lot of the side characters. I liked this book so much that it made me look up the series, because I did not realize that this is a second book in a series. I also didn't realize that this author, Rebecca Weatherspoon, has written multiple different series, and there are characters in this book that are from the Loose End series, which this book is in, and there's also characters that are in, I don't know what, the Bearded Something series. I can't remember what it's called, but there's also characters that are in that series, and this book really made me want to read more Rebecca Weatherspoon. I really liked that this book was not just a romance novel, and I also liked that it was short, sweet, and to the point. I am a romance reader who needs plot in order to really enjoy the story. Romance and spicy scenes can only take me so far. Honestly, I really can only handle a couple of them before I start to kind of get like, not even annoyed by them, but like they start to become meaningless after a while. So like one or two, great, but anything after that is a little bit too much for me, and I'll usually just kind of skip through them and not read the spicy scenes because they become redundant in my eyes. Obviously, everybody else is different, but this book had a really great storyline that I actually could relate to. It has a lot to do with grief. It has a lot to do with family dynamics, family secrets, and how those secrets can tear families apart to the point where someone can pass away and those bonds that were broken have not been fixed yet, and how devastating that can be to a family. So really, really enjoyed this book. Will be reading more Rebecca Weatherspoon. Loved it. And speaking of reading more Rebecca Weatherspoon, I did read another Rebecca Weatherspoon book after I finished Zenny. So the second book that I read this month was Rafe, also by Rebecca Weatherspoon. And this book I ended up giving 3 stars to. So again, read this during the challenge. I really did like this book. However, there were certain things that I just could not really look past or get over, and that took me out of the story, and I wasn't able to enjoy it just for what it was. So Rafe is about a male nanny who gets hired by a recently divorced mother of twins. He's taking care of those twins, and he falls in love with her. While I did like Rafe as a character individually, and while I did like Sloane as a character individually, decisions that were made in certain situations really made me uncomfortable, number one, and they also seemed very unrealistic to me. Like the timeline of the story didn't really make sense. I'm kind of a stickler for, especially in contemporary romance books that are taking place in the real world, I'm really a stickler for how much time has passed in the relationship. I don't need to see everything on page. It can still be a 260-page book, and I can still feel like the relationship was long enough in order for these people to feel so strongly about one another. However, and I know people do fall in love that quickly, but the lengths at which the people act and or the sacrifices that they're willing to make, it just does not quite compute with me. And I've also realized that I don't think that I'm a huge fan of reading romance novels where there are children involved, because certain aspects of that kind of made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. There were certain things that happened where I was like, Sloane, you're kind of being an irresponsible mother. I know that the author is like telling us all these great things that you do with your kids and how smart your kids are and you're a great mother, and it seems like you are, but it also seems like you're being a little bit reckless in the relationship. So because I'm not really able to kind of suspend my disbelief for those kinds of things, I think that I'm going to, like I said, try to steer clear of romance novels that have kids with them, because I watch too many true crime stories, too much Dateline, all that stuff. I'm leery about things like that. So it might be a me problem, and I completely understand if it is, but it's a problem that I do have. So I gave Rafe 3 stars because while those things did bother me, I did really ultimately like the story. So was The Inmate by Frida McFadden, and I gave this book a 1 star. This is quite possibly, no, it is the worst Frida McFadden book that I have that I have read so far. I've read, 3 or 4 books by her at this point, and I know what to expect with Frida McFadden books. They're not the best written. The plots are not the best written. However, her books tend to have a lot of mess, a lot of people cheating on people, people making really terrible decisions that are frustrating to you. And because these characters are making these dumb decisions and you're invested in how stupid they are, these books become page turners. The Inmate was just to another extreme. The main character was such an idiot and put herself and her child in such dumb scenarios and situations that I couldn't even, again, suspend my level of disbelief. This main character, I might spoil some things here for this one. So I'll try to remember to put a timestamp, or I'll do my classic. I usually will like raise my hand and then put it down and talk normally once spoilers are done. So I'll do that in this video. So spoiler alert. Fast forward to when my hand is no longer up. So my biggest issue with The Inmate is the fact that our main character had been impregnated by a man who is currently incarcerated for attempting to kill her and murdering some of her friends while they were in high school. I believe 10 years have passed, and both of her parents ended up passing away, and she inherits their house. Her son, who is 10 years old, was being bullied in his school back in the city. I believe that they live in New York. And so she decided that the best thing for her to do was to move back to the town that she was basically run off from because everybody hated her because she was a star witness in the trial of the murderer who attempted to murder her and killed her friends. And he was the star quarterback. So people didn't really like her that much, right? And she decides to move her son, who is dealing with bullying, back to this town. And she's hoping that she doesn't get recognized by people, though it is a very small town. Doesn't make sense. Also doesn't make sense that she would move back to this town where the only job that she's able to get is working in the very prison that her ex is currently incarcerated in. This is the only job that she can get as a nurse practitioner, which I find to be highly unlikely. Also, there's no other places in the surrounding area that you could possibly work at. And get this, the real estate agent who is friends with her parents, she really wants to sell this house. So why on God's green earth, as a mother, would you put yourself willingly into a situation where you're moving your child into a town that you've been ostracized from and you're working in the prison with his father? He doesn't know that he's his father. How does that make sense? In my mind, girl, sell the house, move away to a different town. So that's one issue that I had. And then I had several more. I will not talk about this too much because I can go on a huge rant and a tangent. But she also is a complete idiot because she can't even trust her own brain because in her head, she is constantly contradicting herself. She believes him. She doesn't believe him. She thinks that he's really hot. She thinks that he murdered her whole entire friend group and tried to kill her. But maybe he didn't, but maybe he did. It's like, girl, get a grip. Get a grip. And also, the characters did not make sense. They acted so unrealistically. There was a plot twist at the end that I did not expect, but it did not make up for anything. If anything, it made it even more stupid. So, spoilers over. I did not like this book, but it was like a fun sort of dislike. Like, I'm not like mentally scarred by it at all. It's a Frida McFadden book. I don't take her books that seriously. I'll probably still read another Frida McFadden book in the future because, like I said, usually her books are like fun. So I also read The Inmate. So the fourth and final book that I completed reading this month is another book that I read on Kindle. This one was a Kindle Unlimited book. And that book was Insatiable by Lee Rivers. So I ended up giving Insatiable 3 stars. It is a second chance romance about two very flawed people who are experiencing very, very difficult times within their lives and who broke up under extremely I was going to say convoluted, but it's not even really convoluted. It was a huge miscommunication, and also a lot of traumatic things happened to the both of them that caused them to react in this way. And they are basically around each other again. I'm not really going to get too much into the synopsis. I did enjoy this book. I thought that the romance was very compelling to read about, and I thought that the story specifically of the female main character was very, very, again, compelling to read about, and I felt very bad for her, and I had a lot of empathy for her. I also had empathy and compassion and care for the male main character, but I felt like I had a lot more distance from his storyline because a lot of what he had been experiencing and going through was not really introduced until a lot later in the book. So I really enjoyed this book. I read, I think, like 70% of it in one day, pretty much in one sitting. And so I was going to give this book a 5 out of 5 stars because, like, when you have a reading experience like that, where you're pretty much reading the whole book in one sitting, you're like, I have to give this a 5-star just off of experience alone. However, once we reached the 70% mark, from 70 to 80%, no, from 70 to 90%, I was not a fan of the book. I felt like the plot took a backseat to just endless, gratuitous, spicy scenes. And like I said before, I don't mind spicy scenes in books. However, I feel like they should have purpose. They should carry the plot forward a little bit. Or even if they don't do that, just have like a couple of them. The last, from 70% to 90%, it was just one after another, after another, after another. So much so that I just started to skim and skip because I'm like, okay, we get it. We get it. They are attracted to each other. We understand. What about the plot? So I had initially believed, because at the beginning of the book, we are introduced to our main two characters, Stacy and Cade, and then we're also introduced to their friend group, Cade's friends and Stacy's friends. Stacy is friends with Cade's twin sister, and his twin sister has kind of like a semi-romance with Cade's friend, Bass, and Stacy's other friend, Taylor, I can't remember which one it is, it has an on and off relationship with Cade's other friend, Dex. So when I first started reading the first book, I was like, oh, this seems like it's hinting at the first book being about Stacy and Cade, maybe the second one being about Tyler and Dex, and the third one being about, I can't remember the sister's name, and Bass. That is not the case. This is a through line story. So because I had assumed that the first book was going to be an open and closed book about Stacy and Cade's relationship, I was expecting certain plot points to be introduced, dealt with, and completed, and there was a conclusion by the end of the story. And when I hit the 70% mark, I started to realize that that's not what was going to happen. And at that point, I decided to look it up to see if this was actually about 3 different couples. Found out that it wasn't. I was fine with that. But then, like I said, the sex scenes were very gratuitous, and I was about to just say, you know what, I'm not going to continue on with the series, but then the last 10% of the book happened, and it recaptured my interest because the plot started to move again. So I finished that book giving it a 3 out of 5 stars because I was like, okay, I didn't like from 70 to 90%, but 80% of the book I did like. So I'm going to give that a 3 stars. So then I decided to pick up Voracious by Lee Rivers. This is my third DNF of the month. So Voracious, it basically was my suffering of that 70 to 90% in book 1. That was my suffering for the first 37% of Voracious. So in my opinion, and it turned out to be true, I believed that this had to have been a Wattpad original because the way that it was written is almost like it was written as one long story that somebody was like, okay, well, maybe we'll make book 1 end right here, and then maybe we'll make book 2. I was like, this does not seem like 3 different complete stories to be books, and I was correct. So these books were originally a Wattpad story, so that started to make sense. When it came to book 2, there were a lot of flashback scenes. Most of the first 37%, because that's where I DNF'd the book, most of it was flashbacks, and most of the flashbacks, I was like, why are we flashing back to this? It was retreading through information that we already knew. Like in the first book, we're introduced to the fact that Cade has 2 dogs. So in a flashback, we see a flashback of him getting the dogs and him introducing the dogs to her and her being scared of the dogs. And then they take the dogs on a walk. I don't care. Why am I reading a 10-minute chapter about these fucking Dobermans? I don't care about them. Then we already know that they were in a relationship. Why do we need a play-by-play of everything that happened to make them be in a relationship? It's literally like, you know, when you're reading a book and you see that there's a flashback, you're thinking that you're going to get important details that pertain to what's happening present day in the story. No. These flashbacks were just so that you could get more gratuitous sex scenes, which I know that this is a dark romance, and I know that a lot of people read dark romance specifically for the spicy scenes. I like dark romance. I like the darker plots. I like all that kind of stuff, but I don't need so much that is so meaningless and pointless. That is my problem. I felt like I was just reading meaningless, pointless shit. So at a certain point, I was like, okay, like, what is this? What am I reading? They barely interacted in the second book. It felt like that complete halt that I was talking about from 70 to 90% started over again. There was very little plot movement, except for just to make me feel extremely bad for these characters. And these characters were essentially being tortured. Like, it was pretty shitty to read about, right? So I was like, okay, let me go on Goodreads and see what other people are saying, because I don't know if I'm just like not, like, if there's something wrong with me, like, am I being hypercritical, like, what's going on? And that could be the case. But I looked up on Goodreads, and I specifically looked up the 2 and 3 star ratings because I gave the first book 3 stars. So a lot of people were saying the same things that I was saying, that the flashbacks were boring. And when I tell you, I probably read, like, I'll say, because the chapters are shorter, I guess. I probably read, let's say if I read 20 chapters, 15 of them were flashbacks. Like, there were so many flashbacks. So people were saying the flashbacks are boring. They were saying that the book is basically torture porn. They don't really get to communicate or interact with each other that much. It was originally a Wattpad story that was not really edited or broken up at all. And that it was a meandering, meaningless mess. And so I was like, okay, well, these people agree with me. I'm not wasting my time with this book anymore. I'm really sad about it, though, because like I said, I really did connect very deeply with Stacy's character specifically and the things that she was going through, because I feel like a lot of women probably have gone through similar situations where they're living with people who are extremely abusive and who they feel like, well, I know for a fact that a lot of people, not even just women, but a lot of people live in situations like that and where they don't really have anywhere else to go. So I felt really bad for her character, and I felt like she had a very realistic sort of situation. Cade, like I said, I also felt bad for, but his situation was very unrealistic to me. Some of it was realistic, but other aspects of it were not, like what he did for a living, like the sort of like espionage parts of it and how reckless he was, but he was very calculated, but he's like extremely reckless and makes the worst decisions and is an idiot. Anyway, I'm done ranting about those books. So I DNF'd Voracious. So yeah, if you read that book and it gets better, let me know. I might give it a try again, but yeah, so those are the books that I read or DNF'd in January. So now let's get into the books that I purchased in January. So I am on a no-buy sort of thing, and that does not mean that I am not allowed to buy anything. It just means that I have to follow certain rules before I'm allowed to buy certain things. So when it comes to books, I cannot purchase a book if I have not read that book in the month. So basically, if I read 4 books, I can buy 4 books. If I read 6 books, I can buy 6 books at the end of the month. However, the total of the books that I buy cannot exceed $40 in that month. So if I'm able to find 8 books for $40, holy shit, that would be great. it's probably unlikely. So the first book that I purchased in January was actually Rafe on the Kindle. I purchased that before I had these no buy rules set in place, and honestly I forgot that I purchased it until I was trying to figure out what books I purchased this month. So I purchased Rafe on Kindle. The next book that I purchased was actually The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. And and I purchased this from Books A Million. This is a book about a woman who needs a date for her sister's wedding in Spain. She's basically been telling her family and her ex-boyfriend and her ex-boyfriend's fiance that she has an American man that she's in love with, and she needs a date so that people know that she's, or think that she isn't lying. So this is a book that I am excited about. This is, I believe, on my TBR for February. So that's one book I purchased. The next book that I purchased is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this book is about a woman who married her high school sweetheart. He ends up going on a business trip abroad, I believe, and he gets, his plane disappears or gets in a crash over the Pacific Ocean, and he is presumed dead. Fast forward years later, she is figuring out who she is. She's starting to feel comfortable to date again. And lo and behold, her husband actually did not die. And he returns home, and basically the fallout of that situation. So I have read this book in the past. I would love to reread this. I lost my original copy, so I'm happy to have this one. And the third book that I got is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon, and this is by Kimberly Lemming. I don't really know specifically what this book is about. I mean, the title is a little self-explanatory. I know that Capri and Bookland really liked this book, and several other booktubers I have seen and heard talk about this book, so I decided to give it a chance. It's also a part of a series, and the covers are gorgeous. I was going to say Gorgina. Who used to say Gorgina? Who used to say that? They're gorgeous. So this is the other book that I purchased. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what books you read in January. Are you interested in any of the books that I read or any of the books that I acquired in the month of January? And yeah, have a great day and don't sweat the small stuff. Bye.